Hey guys, it's Political here. I hope that you're interested in politics just as much as I am. And even if you're not, I hope you stick around so you can kind of learn a little bit more about who represents you and who doesn't. But before we do all that, let's dive deep into politics today. Daniel Reed Crenshaw is a former United States Navy SEAL who is currently serving in Texas' 2nd Congressional District in the House of Representatives. Arguably one of the upcoming stars of the Republican Party, he has made himself into a household name as he has appeared on TV in a slew of interviews and also podcasts. He's made himself even more popular or even got a wider fan base when he appeared on Saturday Night Live alongside Pete Davidson. He is seen as a supporter to the conservative agenda, supportive of the current president, and his claim that border security and immigration reform are high on his agenda. Crenshaw is seen as likable and has grown a popular base in Texas. So let's take a closer look. Mr. Crenshaw was born to American parents in Aberdeen, Scotland on March 14, 1984. Representative Crenshaw grew up in Katy, Texas. He lost his mother to breast cancer and that she had battled for 4.5 years. Mr. Crenshaw stated on multiple occasions that his mother's strength and her braveness are currently and will always be an influence on him. Crenshaw's father worked in the oil industry, and that allowed for him to grow up in both Ecuador and Colombia. Both of these countries are rich in Spanish culture, and it allowed Crenshaw the opportunity to learn a second language and become proficient in Spanish. He actually graduated from Nueva Granada High School in Bogota, Colombia. Crenshaw turned his sights to college and went to Tufts University back in the States. He graduated with a bachelor's degree in international relations in May 2006. He then pursued a master's of public administration from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government in September 2017. Here we begin to see his aspirations start for politics. Crenshaw, as noted before, served in the Navy SEALs for 10 years. He had 5 tours of duty and served in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was awarded 2 Bronze Star medals, the Purple Heart, and the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Valor. After his service, he had completed his MPA at Harvard and worked as a military legislative assistant for Congressman Pete Sessions in 2017. Shortly after this stint, Crenshaw opted to run for the United States House of Representatives in Texas's 2nd Congressional District to take over for the retiring Ted Poe in the 2018 elections. Crenshaw saw a lot of opposition for his initial run, as his opponent of the same party, Kevin Roberts, was backed by Senator Cruz and Texas Governor Greg Abbott. They ran ads comparing him to more liberal counterparts such as Bernie Sanders and Barack Obama. He ended up beating Kevin Roberts in a runoff to represent the Republican ticket. Crenshaw defeated his Democratic rival, Todd Linton, and was elected on November 6th. What are some important contributions or accomplishments of this figure? Well, again, like I said before in previous videos, these aren't in any necessary order, nor are they endorsements, but they're just some things I think highlight his career. First, Dan Crenshaw has gone to work in the House of Representatives. He separates himself from others who vote and has only missed 12 of his 810 roll call votes. This is as of May 2020. That being said, he is doing what his constituents expect him to do. Second, Dan Crenshaw has a young career compared to his peers and is one of the newest elected to the House. Dan has continued to show why he is liked and put forward bills, whether people think it's controversial or not. H.R. Bill 6519 is called Holding the Communist Party Accountable for Infecting Americans Act of 2020 and shows that Crenshaw cares about his fellow Americans regardless of the party, being able to bring lawsuits against the Chinese government for the apparent mishandling of information in the beginning of this pandemic. Another accomplishment or notable thing for him is that he's openly supported same-sex marriage and believes that government should not be involved in regulating marriage. This is usually seen as taboo in inner Republican circles still. You can see that the social side of Crenshaw departs from the old school senators who don't even make comments since it makes them uncomfortable. What are some things that he has done for his people? Flooding is prone in Houston, and Dan Crenshaw has stepped up to protect the residents of his district. According to a press statement, Congressman Dan Crenshaw announced that Humboldt Independent School District is receiving $25 million grant from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, in order to protect the Kingwood High School from flooding in the future. The district does not need to foot most of the bill. So essentially he got money allocated from the government to help out his own school district. And this is kind of intricate on a lot of details. Typically Republicans don't really try to pull any weight to support their school districts, but this is an interesting one to see that he knows that this is within his bounds and within his congressional district. It's best to always help those in need, regardless if he believes in public education or not. This is a good bill that helps that district, which even came out in support of Crenshaw. It's been over 2 years since Hurricane tore through the community, Crenshaw said, and it left the students without any classrooms, a lot of broken desks, a lot of things that students need, and just specifically the school itself was damaged. The school was closed for 7 months, relocating sporting events and forcing students to commute to a neighboring school for the majority of the school year. While we cannot take back the experience, we can prevent students from facing the same hardship. This grant will allow Humboldt ISD to make Kingwood High's infrastructure more resilient to future weather-related disasters. He even gets support from Humboldt ISD Superintendent, Dr. Elizabeth Fagan, who said, "Every time we have a major weather event, Kingwood High students and staff worry that they might be disrupted or displaced from their high school once again." Congressman Dan Crenshaw and Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher announced their bipartisan amendment to provide $45 million in additional relief for households impacted by Hurricane Harvey, and it was passed by the House of Representatives. She goes on to say that Hurricane Harvey was a traumatic experience for not only the staff, but most importantly, the students. So by having these grants and having this fund from FEMA, it helps kind of reduce that fear that it'll happen again, because they can build for the future. Congressman Crenshaw goes on to say that Texans will continue to recover from the devastation that Harvey had years ago, and that these kind of efforts, the financial help that the government's providing, help small businesses speed up their recovery, and it also bypasses that government interference where they say that they still need to make changes to their federal law. So they went around that and provided relief in a different way by coming up with a bill. It also affects the people that Lizzie Fletcher represents as well. I think this is a good thing for them to continue to do. So you have, not only did you have that FEMA relief for the school district, now you have money that he's trying to allocate to small businesses in his area, also probably in Lizzie Fletcher's area as well. I don't really know how big it covered, but I'm sure for both of them to come to agreement, it had to do with both their areas. Let's jump into the critique. This section is meant to be a critique of Dan Crenshaw. These are my own questions that I came up with after I researched him. These are my own thoughts that I came up as well. Now, keep in mind, as I always say, I'm an advocate of relatives and family members being kept out of the limelight when looking at someone who holds public office. It is not okay to harass or dox them or do whatever people think they can do to family members of public officials, especially their kids. I do think public officials should be scrutinized for the things they do while in office and held to a high standard while in office. Their task should be working for their constituents. They are here to serve you, the people, no one else. So now that we got some key facts and information about Dan Crenshaw, we learned a little bit more about him. Let's take a dive and look at some issues that are raised when I researched him. One of the first things I would like to note is the marijuana debate that seems to be going under a transformation as of now. With states making their own decisions on what to do with constituents and their advocacy to legalize the drug, or at the very least for medical marijuana to have a place in society, Dan Crenshaw appears to show some sort of uncertainty on this subject. Dan was on the Joe Rogan podcast and debated merits of marijuana legalization. He ended up saying that medical cannabis should be federally legal and states should be empowered to set their own legalization policies. which to a certain extent that falls in line with the typical Republican mentality and the concept of federalism, which adheres to his base. The issue here is that Dan Crenshaw has not added his name to help sponsor pending medical cannabis bills in the House. He also voted against a House amendment to shield state marijuana laws from federal interference. This means federal law can very much trump any sort of state law or action. This is important for two reasons. And the first I could say is pretty obvious. That being marijuana has been seen more of as positive light by younger Americans, and it may be hard to be playing both sides of the fence to appeal to Crenshaw's older base, also not alienating those who see marijuana as beneficial. The second reason is that being against something that could potentially bring money into your state could be a little bit of a backfiring in a sense. If you want to build an economy and have one as diverse as you want to do in Texas, one of the biggest things to support right now would be marijuana legalization, due to the fact that it could bring in a lot of taxes for the state and it could help pose and bring new businesses to the forefront. If there's a strong demand from its constituents to legalize it, why would you go against the vote and the will of your people? Also, Crenshaw states a very odd line to help defend his position against recreational marijuana after Rogan pressed him, stating that alcohol is federally legal despite its risks to young people, saying the alcohol issue is out of the bag and that we're never going to put that back in. He is simply saying that he would want to study it more to see why it would benefit society, normalizing it, as maybe he's also implying that had they known the effects of alcohol that we see today, would they have been slower to legalize it then? I think that's the rationale that he's coming from, but obviously you're pitting today's morals to the ones of yesterday and today's thought process and putting it into the lens of yesterday. And although I could see several holes with this thinking, I do see that Rogan pressed Crenshaw hard enough to get him to point out that Crenshaw did not have a strong defense for his position. Now, let's look at his donors. Dan Crenshaw is a top recipient for the following industries in 2019, the 2020 election cycle. Correctional facilities for profit, aka for-profit prisons. I think that this is problematic for several reasons. I know there's a debate raging between jail time versus rehabilitation, which I encourage you as a viewer to go and do some research on. I will leave you with a snippet from justice.org that states the problems when profits in prisons and detention centers are in the mix. One particularly notorious example of this was in 2009 Kids for Cash scandal, in which two judges in Pennsylvania were revealed to have been accepting money from the owner of two private juvenile detention centers in return for sentencing juvenile offenders to time in those centers. Children were sentenced to time in detention centers for offenses like shoplifting DVDs or failing to appear at hearings they were never notified of. The Pennsylvania judges were met with widespread outrage, and rightly so. But the corporations that run prisons continue to protect their profit margins in less illegal and insidious ways. These corporations stand to make money when more people are sentenced to prison, so they work hard to influence policy to push for harder sentencing laws. You can kind of see why this would not be a good thing for Dan Crenshaw to be taking money from these things, especially right now, given our situation in the world when we're looking at why certain people are disproportionately put into jails. Okay, and then another place that Dan gets his money from is from retirees and oil and gas firms. Dan gets money from real estate and lawyers at big amounts as well. Dan is raising money and has already raised 3 times as much money, nearing the 6.5 million mark compared to his 2 million that he earned back in 2018. This shows how he definitely gained traction with his donors and is overwhelmingly swamping his competition at this point. Let's take a look at his 2018 race, in which Dan only received 20% of his money from outside of the state. I personally think this is a lot, but this is just me, since I believe that all money should come from the place you want to represent. But now, his 2020 campaign, a whopping 46% of his money comes from out of state. That is nearly half of his money. His number tops locations from Houston and Dallas, Texas, but his next top metro areas are New York, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, Long Beach, where he receives $134,000 from New York, $112,000 from Washington, and $83,000 from LA. Looking at where he gets his money, and now where you see the shift from where he was only receiving about 20% from his money from out of state when he first ran, now close to nearly 50% that he's receiving his money from out of state on his current venture into the 2020 re-election cycle. You can kind of see where people kind of draw those flags again. On the campaign trail, Crenshaw promised voters he'd work across the aisle to give Medicare the power to negotiate with big drug manufacturers to lower drug costs. He even put it on his website. Today, after accepting tens of thousands of dollars in donations from insurance and drug manufacturer industries, Crenshaw's position has changed. He even scrubbed it from his website. And that was an original pledge. So he flipped on a key promise, and now he's selling out to drug manufacturers. In 2018, Dan Crenshaw campaigned on a promise to lower prescription drug prices by giving Medicare the power to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies to help lower the skyrocketing costs plaguing Texas families. Now, after taking thousands from healthcare special interests, and just a few months ago, Crenshaw shifted his position. Now let's look at room for improvement. Is there room for improvement? Yes, of course there is. And there's always room to improve, and Dan is no different. I think looking at his track record, it's hard to find things that he did, that he's done, just because he's very young in the game at this point. Dan needs to be an example for more of his party to lay down the partisanship and do work with the other side of the aisle to meet each other in the middle. The gridlock we are in politically is sad and never helps when we're trying to get things done. I know he was on the freshman side of entering politics, but he could do more and should be doing more for his people. In particular, there are still residents who are reeling financially from Hurricane Harvey. Dan has shown some leadership here, and I'm sure the city of Houston wants more of it. One of my biggest controversies to hit home for Crenshaw was his unwillingness to take on the pharmaceutical companies after researching the things that were said about him and put into publication. Crenshaw did have this on his website and took it down. Why does he not want to take them on? Maybe the money he is getting from these drug manufacturers are clouding his judgment. I think a way for Crenshaw to fix this is to implement what he wanted from the beginning and restoring that promise he made to voters. He won not so handedly the last time, so it may be best to listen to your base that got you there. In the end, your voters are not voting in Washington, D.C., but rather they're voting from Houston. Dan is young, but he can continue to increase his reach and his impact if he continues to keep his people he initially had in mind when he ventured out to become a politician. So long as he remembers those people, does what he can for those people, pushes legislation for his people, he can become even more popular while acknowledging the changing demographics in his district.